Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. Now, the United Kingdom Supreme Court has delivered a decisive ruling in favor of Nigeria, dismissing the appeal filed by Process and Industrial Developments and ordering the firm to pay up to £44 million in legal costs. Now, the judgment marks the final chapter in a decade-long legal battle in which PNID, an offshore company, sought to claim over 11 billion from Nigeria through an arbitration award that has now been declared fraudulent. The Supreme Court upheld earlier decisions of both the Commercial Court and the Court of Appeal, affirming that Nigeria's legal costs must be settled in pounds sterling, not in naira, as PNID had requested. Now, according to the ruling, PNID attempt to pay in local currency was rejected on the grounds that the costs were incurred in pounds and should therefore be reimbursed in the same currency. Now, this court's decision came after years of legal wrangling that began when PNID claimed that Nigeria breached a gas supply contract, which later investigations revealed was tainted by bribery and corruption. Of course, I would definitely say that this is a win in this particular situation. It's been a very, very long case. There's been a lot of back and forth as to what exactly brought us to this very point, especially considering that at some point in time, Nigeria was looking at the possibility of paying about 11 billion in damages, that is to PNID. So to see that ruling overturned and to see Nigeria at the positive end of this entire case, I would say in certain ways it is uplifting, especially because of certain conceptions that are rampant about Nigeria: bribery, corruption, fraud. So it was very easy to go with the narrative that this is exactly what has happened. Nigeria was fraudulent in this deal, did not supply the wet gas as it was supposed to, and that is exactly why that arbitration clause in that contract was taking effect to get that initial ruling. But looking at how they found that there was some evidence that was brought in that was found to be fraudulent, and now Nigeria being at the positive end of this, I think it's an interesting end to, like I said, a decades-long case. And I'm just looking forward to how, irrespective of this, we can still proceed with the goals of this entire contract, with what this contract was supposed to provide for us, because at the core of it all, power generation is still a major issue within Nigeria. So can we look back at what the gains of this contract were supposed to be and see how they can be effected in today's world?
That the PNID case is a case that I have followed for a very long time. And yes, it is positive that the UK court has come out against PNID and said that they have to pay Nigeria's legal fees, the sum of £44 million. However, we must go beyond that. We must look at the roots of this case, and we must look at how Nigeria also sought to defend itself in this case. One person that I must wonder how he feels today and what he's thinking about is the former Attorney General of the Federation, Malami, because he sought to defend Nigeria by dragging some very, very important names through the mud, particularly in the case of the former AGF, Bello Adoke, and the former Attorney General of Lagos State, Shupo Shashore. Now, when Malami handled this case, obviously, we've seen the outcome of the whole PNID case, but it also shows us the anyhowness when it comes to the root of some of these contracts that Nigeria gets into with foreign powers, whether it's being oil and gas or, as you said earlier, Kachi, energy generation, because of course we are still in arbitration right now with Sunrise Company when it comes to the Mambila project, the Mambila power project. And so we have to see what lessons can Nigeria learn from PNID. Anyhowness is, and it's some of the same lessons we should have learned from the OPL 245 saga. Anyhowness from the root of any contract can come to bite us when we go to the international stage. What we have been lucky with here is that PNID comported itself even worse than the Nigerian government did, and therefore we have been able to get away with it. But it's not a case of something that we should sweep to the side. And when we also think about Nigerian government officials being held accountable for the end point of these things, we have to see what's even going on, for example, in America, in California, where an NNPC, someone who worked for the NNPC, Okoronkwo, has been charged with crimes around corruption and has had to give up a home that they say that he bought from the proceeds of corruption. We must also understand that internally, domestically, do we see those type of prosecutions go through? Do we see people face consequences for their bad actions? Or do we get a good judgment here, a good judgment there, and then sweep under the rug all the other things that came before it? So the PNID case is definitely a lesson for Nigeria. We have lost certain arbitration cases and we have won certain arbitration cases. And Kachi, as you know, the law says if you come to equity, you must come to equity with clean hands. We're very lucky in this case, but I definitely think that going forward, we need to institute proper safeguards from the genesis of contracts and of work with foreign companies to the absolute end of it, so we don't end up in more cases like this.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much, Adiso. That was a wonderful wrap-up of what we're seeing here. I was actually in the courtroom when this judgment actually first came down. I believe it was late 2023, early 2024, and it was quite something to listen to the justice really take PNID to town. They had a whole team of lawyers. A lot of money, you can see, went into their defense. So it was quite refreshing to see that in a case where you're looking at a lot of money, a lot of product, and reputations of and accusations of corruption being held and arbitrated, the fact that Nigeria were able to emerge essentially as the triumphant party was something that was quite remarkable to listen to in that courtroom that day. That being said, I do think it is also a positive thing to show and really to give an example of what justice should look like. It is quite underhanded of PNID and their legal representation to try and say that they will pay this judgment in Nigerian naira, according to what exchange rate. So it is something that you can imagine will be welcomed, that they have been ordered to pay this money, return this money in pound sterling. I think that is the correct thing that should have happened. And as you rightfully said, Adesua, while Nigeria is very lucky to have emerged in this example as the victor, it does lead and leave space for many lessons to be learned so that we don't find ourselves in another legal battle yet again. Let's move on to another story. Now, 5 years ago, the anti-police brutality #EndSARS protest ended in tragedy when security forces opened fire on demonstrators at the Lekki tollgate in Lagos. Now, as the country marks the anniversary, questions do remain over reform, remembrance, and press freedom. Now, I did put together a little roundup report on this. Let's take a look at it.
Five years on, the Lekki tollgate remains a powerful symbol of protest, pain, and persistence.
Yeah, EndSARS ideology.
On October 20th, 2020, peaceful demonstrators calling for an end to police brutality were met with gunfire from soldiers.
He was shot in the head.
The victims and their families encouraged.
What followed sparked outrage across Nigeria and around the world.
Nigerian youth are teaching the world one beautiful and vital lesson.
At the first-year anniversary, press freedom was attacked, and discourse over how to refer to the events of October 20th in the media still linger. And in the years since, the government has pledged reforms, launching inquiries into the events of that night. But for many Nigerians, the call for accountability continues.
From the 18th of
Today, the tollgate stands quiet, but memories of that night are far from forgotten. Across Lagos, gatherings and online tributes mark the 5th anniversary, honouring those who lost their lives and the movement that demanded change. The EndSARS protest became one of the most significant youth-led movements in Nigeria's modern history, igniting a national conversation about governance, justice, and the right to be heard. 5 years later, the legacy of EndSARS endures, not only in calls for reform, but in the determination of a generation unwilling to be silenced. Adefemi Akisoya, Arise News, Lagos.
Well, as you saw there, it has been 5 years since the hashtag #EndSARS protests were forcibly put down at the Lekki toll gate. And over the years, I won't say that it has erased itself from people's memory or consciousness, but unfortunately, we are seeing, or we're unable really to see, the state government or even the federal government put together any type of proper memorial to recognize what happened at the toll gate. Still, there's still so much back and forth over the language that we should use. And if we look across the 5 years, first we were calling it a shooting, a massacre, the incident at the toll gate. And so when there's so much discombobulation on whether or not or how to refer to a time, it becomes very easy for it to kind of dissipate from people's consciousness. And I think that when we're looking at a milestone, which it is, 5 years of what is something that was marking a turning point in modern Nigerian history, it is quite disappointing that listening to people in putting together that report and the comments that we've had thereafter, is that a lot of people feel as though nothing has changed really when it comes to the lawlessness of our security forces or how police conduct themselves or the attitudes to civil resistance and people being able to show their dissatisfaction in any way. We haven't gotten to a point where protests can be adequately put together and managed. And to that point, we did see those images of Yemi Adamulekun, who is, of course, the Director General of Enough is Enough, a friend to the station here. And we saw that she was trying to lay flowers at the toll gate, and those flowers were forcibly removed from her hands and destroyed, completely unnecessary. And I think that that is another example of the high-handedness that we see with our security forces, not just in Lagos, but across Nigeria, when it comes to dealing with people when they want to show their own feelings towards governance and how things are in this country. I do think that 5 years later, I certainly haven't forgotten the terror of that night. And I know that many people haven't forgotten. And just a quick word to the victims, people who never made it home that night, we still remember you here at Arise. And as ever, we will join with your families to hope that one day your story will be told adequately.
I couldn't agree more. Taking an excerpt from Chimamanda's essay, Reflections on the #EndSARS process, where she said that the protests are not just about the police brutality, they're a demand for dignity, a demand for the Nigerian state to see its young people as human beings. I think, for me, that remains a key reflection when I think about #EndSARS. The fact that young people are not only relevant when they are making Nigeria popular on TV, through music, through the creative arts, through innovations in tech and artificial intelligence, through exceptional work in education and philanthropy. That's not the only time that Nigerian youth want to be noticed. We want to be noticed when it pertains to how we move about our security, the respect for freedom of expression, whether it's in the way they look, in the way they speak, in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's something that we still struggle with even till today. I think #EndSARS, like you rightly said, Adefemi, the term as to what exactly happened that day. Some people would still argue that do not call it a massacre or do not call it a memorial. What are you remembering? Or remember it as just a bunch of youths who just wanted to disturb the peace. Some people still see it that way. But I know what I see it as, and I know that was the night that will forever be cemented in Nigeria's history as the one time where we could have done something right. And we were asking ourselves, and by asking ourselves, I mean the government and the people who gave the order and who gave the shots and who ordered those shots. And that's the question that still remains largely unanswered. My heart goes out to every single person who came out for that fight. I will definitely say that it has definitely inspired people to speak up for what they believe in. And we've seen that happen so many different times. And I'm looking forward to it continue to happen, where Nigerian youth will not be intimidated and they will always speak up for what is right. My heart goes out to the families of those who were affected. And for people who still question whether or not people were shot or killed, I hope that some of these videos that you see on the screen remind you that what happened that night was not a myth. It was real, it happened, and it should never have. Adesua in our Abuja studio, what do you think about this?
You're absolutely right. This should have never happened. I'll never forget hearing those gunshots ring out at Lekki tollgate from my house, and how frightening that was. And going on live and seeing what was happening live to people at the tollgate in Lekki, which had become a symbolic, heart of the EndSARS movement. And honestly, beyond the trauma that night brought upon us as young Nigerians who stood together, because I think something that's incredibly important is that people did not only die at the Lekki tollgate. In the lead up to October 20, we saw a lot of activity going on across the country. In Benin City, they said that they shot at protesters with live bullets. In Rivers, they said they shot at protesters. In Delta, they said they shot at protesters. We saw protesters coming out to the streets of Nigeria from Kano all the way down to Lagos. And this was a movement of young people, a movement so alien to how our political elite and political class run our system, or even view protests, that they did not know how to handle it, and they thought to silence it by striking at the symbolic heart of the protest visibly in what was the Lekki tollgate. And I think, beyond us condoling those who are mourning, beyond us remembering the trauma of that night, beyond us also remembering what brought us together, demanding first of all for a better Nigeria, for dignity in our lives, for our security service to work for our benefit, not for us to succeed in spite of the country, but because this country supports us with our security, with our lives, with the infrastructure. But none of those things truly have been resolved even 5 years on. And beyond that, there are people who are killed, even in Lagos, beyond Lekki, in Orile Gamu, in Alausa, in Surulere, in Ekpe. Those people, even the young journalist who was shot, whose family says his body still has not been returned, they deserve the dignity of burial. They deserve the dignity of closure. And so I implore any of the authorities, we are beyond denying what happened or what did not happen. But those who lost their loved ones, who are searching for their bodies, for some sort of closure, I hope those who are in the power and able to do so, do so, and return those people to their families.
Absolutely, Adesoa, absolutely. Well, still on another tragic story, at least 35 people were killed and 42 injured on Tuesday when a fuel tanker overturned and exploded in Niger State, central Nigeria. Now, emergency officials said the truck began leaking fuel after overturning and exploded as people tried to collect it. Those injured are said to have been taken to the Federal Medical Center, BIDA, for treatment, while Niger State Governor Umaru Bago has condoled with the people of Essa. The governor, through his chief press secretary, Balogi Ibrahim, described the incident as worrisome and pathetic. What I find really interesting about some stories, the fact that I cannot express shock at this in any way, because this is not the first time this is happening. We can decide to talk about the tanker in itself and what led to it overturning. That is one safety conversation that we have been addressing for the longest time. We've been addressing how these trucks are managed. We've been addressing how these drivers are managed. That's not a shocker. It just happens again. We can also decide to address the people who, for the life of me, I do not understand why a truck will be overturned and people will be running to see what they can get out of it, whether it's a truck that's carrying fuel or it's a truck that's carrying food. The safety hazard that is being in that environment, as to why nobody thinks that the most important thing to do right now is clear the area. My heart goes out to the families of those who have been affected by this. But again, I will ask Nigerians, are we not tired of our hearts going out to each other? When are we going to start to take our safety into our own hands and know when to leave an environment that is just completely detrimental? It's beyond our control. We cannot control how these trucks or drivers are managed, clearly. So can we just clear the area in cases of emergencies? When you see that an emergency like that has happened, as opposed to rushing to see if you can pack the food, if you can get the fuel, can we just clear the area? It's, again, just another pathetic story that we're looking at when it comes to safety on the roads.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a conversation about the road itself, that it it wasn't in the greatest condition.
Yes.
And that may have contributed to the accident itself. We don't know how far that is true, but we do know that the road itself had safety concerns, wasn't up to par. And that calls into question, again, collaboration between the federal and the state level and why we have this issue of such terrible roads throughout our country. These are the consequences. And I think that we're so used to, as a country, just getting by and just making sure that, okay, if this journey was successful, then perhaps the next one will be. And I hate the fact that anywhere in the world, it's only after a disaster, only after a catastrophe, that effort is now made to fix something that should have been fixed in the first place. So if they're saying that that road, that there had been federal allocations to fix it and it wasn't done, why is that? Who is responsible for that? Whose responsibility is that? And now, when we are looking at now the situation of dozens of people dead needlessly, unfortunately, it is heartbreaking. Accidents do happen everywhere in the world. That's why they are called accidents. But oftentimes, the type of accidents that affect us here in Nigeria are ones that shouldn't really have happened, ones that we could have been protected from, something that could have been prevented if the adequate people did their job adequately. I think that is all we ever need. It does look as though we've run out of time for the week that was. I would have loved to have heard your thoughts, but I think we are going to go on to break. Kachi, if you could take us over to break, and then we will continue our show.
Oh, okay.
Are we done?
That's interesting.
It looked like it.
Well,
I could be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could just, Adesola, do you want to chime in on this topic? Or, I think we can quickly. Do we have the time?
Go ahead.
Quickly chime in here because... Thank you. Because Honorable Saidu Abdullahi moved a motion of urgent national importance in the House of Representatives about this week, saying that that road has become a death trap and a grave site. We've seen multiple tanker explosions, at least 4 this year, and also on that road before. And so when we're thinking about, in terms of accidents, I think we also need to think about negligence, because multiple people have been given the contract for that road over the years. And so we also need to think about corruption and when it can lead to a loss of lives, and who is to be held responsible for this, who was given the contracts for the roads where they paid, was it not followed through? Because one single strip of road, the Bama Lambata road, Lambata Diko road, the same strip of road is seeing multiple tanker explosions.
I mean, I can't say, again, this is another situation. We just had this conversation a couple of days ago about the safety and security of our roads, but that's a whole other conversation. If we decide to get into the road networks, I doubt we'll be able to take that break. Well, that's all on the week that was.